The night dignity was taken. Zara Qureshi learned early in her marriage that silence could bruise just as deeply as blows. In the Qureshi household, cruelty rarely announced itself loudly. It seeped into rooms through cold glances, measured insults, and the quiet approval of those who chose not to intervene. She had married Saad believing that patience could soften hearts, that endurance was a form of virtue. Instead, endurance became her daily sentence. That night, the house smelled of damp earth and burnt spices, the kind of uneasy stillness that precedes disaster. Zara had been in the kitchen when she heard her mother's voice rise, not in anger, but in protest. Rukhsana Begum had come to visit only to plead. She had asked for money Saad's family had promised, but never intended to give, a small amount meant for medical tests. The request was received not as a plea, but as an insult. Zara reached the courtyard just in time to see her mother pushed to the ground. What followed happened with terrifying speed. Accusations flew, greed, shamelessness, poisoning her daughter's mind. Saad stood nearby, his hands clenched at his sides, his eyes fixed anywhere but on his wife or her mother. Zara waited for him to speak, to say one word that would stop what was unfolding. He said nothing. They dragged Rukhsana by the arm, ignoring Zara's screams, ignoring the years etched into her bent back. Someone produced scissors. Another held her down. When they finished, clumps of her mother's hair lay scattered on the dirt like fallen feathers. Blood seeped from a cut near her temple, thin and bright against her skin. By the time it ended, Rukhsana was no longer crying. She stared ahead with hollow eyes, her head unevenly shorn, her dignity stripped as completely as her hair. Zara knelt beside her, shaking, whispering apologies that could never be enough. That was the moment something inside Zara fractured beyond repair. Later, as Zara cleaned her mother's wounds in silence, Saad finally spoke. He told her it was unfortunate, that she should not have brought her mother into their home with demands. His voice was calm, reasonable, almost bored. The distance between them felt immeasurable. Zara realized then that her marriage was not a refuge. It was another form of captivity. Before dawn, she made a decision she had been avoiding for years. Ayaan Malik was not someone Zara knew well, only someone she trusted enough to break her pride for. He had been a colleague years ago, quiet, principled, known for his fairness. More importantly, he was known to act when others hesitated. As the city slept, Zara wrapped her mother in a shawl and led her out of the house without permission or farewell. Ayaan opened his door to a sight that would haunt him long after. Rukhsana could barely stand, her head crudely shaved, her face swollen and pale. Zara's eyes were red, but her voice was steady when she spoke. "They tried to erase her," she said simply. "I didn't know where else to go." Ayaan felt anger rise, not loud or reckless, but cold and precise. He helped them inside without asking questions, fetched water, called a doctor he trusted. As he worked, he observed Zara closely, the way she held herself upright through exhaustion, the way she never once asked for pity. This was not desperation. This was resolve forged in pain. When Rukhsana finally slept, Ayaan and Zara sat across from each other in silence. The truth settled heavily between them. Zara was married, trapped in a family that saw cruelty as discipline. Ayaan, too, carried obligations, an engagement, a carefully ordered life. Yet none of that mattered in that moment. What mattered was that a line had been crossed, and it could not be uncrossed. "I won't send you back," Ayaan said at last. "Whatever this costs, I won't." Zara nodded, relief flickering briefly across her face before responsibility returned. She knew seeking his help would change everything. She also knew she would have done it again. As the first light of morning crept through the window, Ayaan understood that this night was not an ending, but an opening, one that would test loyalty, redefine love, and demand choices neither of them was ready to face. The weight of silence. Morning did not soften what the night had revealed. Sunlight crept into Ayaan Malik's apartment with deceptive gentleness, illuminating the quiet aftermath of violence and flight. Rukhsana Begum lay asleep on the sofa, her breathing shallow but steady, a white cloth wrapped around her injured head. Zara watched her from the doorway, unmoving, as though vigilance itself might keep further harm away. Ayaan stood in the kitchen, staring at an untouched cup of tea. Water had always been his refuge. He believed problems could be contained, resolved through reason and correct action. Yet nothing in his carefully constructed life had prepared him for the moral intrusion now occupying his living room. What had arrived at his door was not merely a wounded woman and her daughter, but a demand he could not ignore. The doctor came and went, leaving behind instructions and an unspoken judgment that lingered in the air. Zara thanked him with quiet dignity, then returned to her mother's side. Only when Roxana slept again did she allow herself to sit, exhaustion finally bending her spine. "I should go," she said, though she made no move to stand. Ayaan understood what she meant. Society would demand her return. Her husband would expect obedience. The world would ask why she had not endured just a little longer. He also understood that sending her back would make him complicit in what had already happened. "You won't," he replied. "Not today." Zara studied him carefully, as though weighing his words for hidden costs. "Helping me will complicate your life," she said. "People will talk." "They always do," Ayaan answered, surprising himself with the firmness of his voice. In the hours that followed, they spoke sparingly, yet meaning gathered between them. Zara told him enough about Saad's indifference, about a household where cruelty was framed as correction. She did not dramatize her suffering. She did not need to. The facts alone carried their own gravity. Ayaan listened, anger tightening in his chest with each measured sentence. He thought of Nimra then, his fiancée, and the life they had planned with quiet efficiency. There was no abuse in that future, no chaos. There was also no urgency, no reckoning. For the first time, he wondered whether stability had dulled his sense of responsibility rather than sharpened it. Zara noticed the shift in him, though she did not name it. "You don't owe us anything," she said softly. "I only needed one night of safety." Ayaan met her gaze. "This isn't about owing," he said. "It's about refusing to look away." By afternoon, reality pressed harder. Zara's phone vibrated repeatedly, messages from Saad and his family stacking like accusations. She did not answer. Each vibration felt like a reminder of a life waiting to reclaim her. When she finally silenced the phone, her hands trembled. Ayaan watched her carefully. He recognized fear, but also resolve hardening into something more dangerous, readiness to lose everything. He realized then that Zara was not seeking rescue. She was seeking a witness, someone who would acknowledge that what had been done to her mother was unforgivable. "I'll speak to a lawyer," he said. "And to the police, if you want." Zara inhaled sharply. The option sounded both like freedom and like war. "Not yet," she said, "but thank you for treating it like a choice." As evening approached, Ayaan received a call from Nimra. He stepped into the hallway, her voice familiar and composed as she spoke of wedding plans and trivial concerns. He responded automatically, yet each word felt increasingly hollow. When he ended the call, he leaned against the wall, unsettled by the realization that part of him was relieved to be interrupted by something real. When he returned, Zara was helping her mother sip water. She looked up, and in that brief moment, something unspoken passed between them. Not desire, not confession, but recognition. They were standing at the edge of decisions that would not remain neutral for long. That night, as the city settled into uneasy sleep, Ayaan lay awake, listening to the sounds of two women breathing under his roof. He understood now that silence had been the true accomplice in their suffering. And he knew, with a clarity that left no room for comfort, that once broken, silence could not be restored without cost. The question was no longer whether his life would change, but how much he was willing to sacrifice to ensure that hers did. The line between duty and desire. The days that followed settled into a careful rhythm, as though all three of them were afraid that a sudden movement might shatter the fragile calm they had assembled. Roxana Begum grew stronger by increments, so small they were easy to miss, yet Zara noticed each one with the devotion of someone guarding a miracle. She changed bandages, prepared simple meals, and spoke to her mother in low, reassuring tones that never acknowledged the violence which had brought them there. Ayaan observed from a respectful distance, but his restraint did little to quiet the thoughts gathering behind his composure. His apartment no longer felt like a private space. It had become a sanctuary shaped by necessity. Each room carried evidence of a choice he was making daily, one that blurred the boundary between assistance and involvement. Zara insisted on contributing, cleaning, organizing, restoring order wherever she could. It was her way of reclaiming control, and Ayaan did not stop her. Instead, he found himself noticing small things: the efficiency of her movements, the discipline beneath her gentleness, the way her strength surfaced most clearly when she believed no one was watching. Admiration crept in uninvited, followed closely by unease. One evening, as Roxana slept peacefully for the first time, Zara and Ayaan sat across from each other with cups of untouched tea. The silence between them was no longer awkward. It had grown weighted with understanding. Zara spoke then, not of what had been done to her, but of what she feared becoming. "I stayed because I thought endurance was love," she said. "I was wrong." Ayaan listened without interruption. He recognized in her confession the same rigidity that had once guided his own life, a belief that correctness was synonymous with goodness. The realization unsettled him. "Endurance has its limits," he said carefully. "So does duty." The word lingered between them, carrying more than its syllables allowed. Ayaan thought again of Nimrah, of promises spoken easily when they had cost him nothing. He wondered when duty had shifted from being a compass to being a cage. Zara's phone rang, slicing through the quiet. Saad's name glowed on the screen. She stared at it for several seconds before letting the call go unanswered. When she set the phone down, her hands were steady, but her eyes were not. "He wants things to return to normal," she said, as if normal didn't nearly destroy us. Ayaan felt a surge of anger, sharper than before. "Normal is not a defense," he replied. He stopped himself from saying more, from crossing a line that was already thinning. Later that night, he stood at the window, watching lights flicker across the city. Zara joined him, careful to keep distance, yet close enough that he was acutely aware of her presence. The shared silence felt intimate in a way neither of them acknowledged aloud. There was no touch, no declaration, only the slow realization that they were becoming essential to one another. Ayaan recognized the danger in that thought immediately. Emotional closeness was not a harmless refuge. It was a form of infidelity, subtle and persuasive. He had not betrayed Nimrah in action, but something inside him was undeniably shifting. The guilt arrived alongside relief, and he despised himself for both. "I should leave," Zara said quietly, echoing words she had spoken before. Ayaan turned to her. "You're safe here," he said, then paused. Safety was no longer the only truth in that statement. She nodded, accepting the answer while sensing its incompleteness. They were both aware now that their bond had moved beyond circumstance. It had grown from shared outrage and compassion into something more precarious: mutual reliance. The following morning brought news that forced clarity. Saad's family had begun asking questions, spreading their own version of events, casting Zara as disobedient and unstable. The implication was clear: return or be ruined. Zara read the messages with a detached calm that frightened Ayaan more than tears would have. "They'll never admit what they did," she said. "They don't need to. Silence protects them." Ayaan felt the last of his neutrality dissolve. He understood then that remaining still was no longer possible. To continue offering quiet shelter without confronting the truth would make him complicit in another way. His feelings for Zara, unspoken though they were, sharpened that understanding rather than softened it. That night, as Zara helped her mother settle into sleep, Ayaan stood alone, confronting a reality he could no longer deny. The line he had sworn never to cross was already beneath his feet. He had not chosen desire over duty, but he had discovered that duty, when stripped of courage, was nothing more than fear wearing a respectable name. And with that recognition came the certainty that the next choice he made would demand everything he had been carefully preserving. The cost of choosing. The confrontation arrived not with violence, but with certainty. It began the morning Saad came to Ayaan's door. Zara heard the knock first. Her body stiffened, instinct sharpening her senses before fear could take hold. Ayaan was already moving, his expression composed in a way that suggested decision rather than hesitation. When he opened the door, Saad stood rigid in the hallway, indignation carefully arranged across his face. "This has gone far enough," Saad said, not greeting Zara, not asking after her mother. "She belongs at home." The word belongs settled heavily in the room. Zara stepped forward before Ayaan could speak. "Your home stopped being mine the night you let them hurt my mother," she said, her voice steady. "You don't get to summon me back with silence and entitlement." Saad scoffed, turning to Ayaan as though appealing to reason. "This doesn't concern you." Ayaan met his gaze without flinching. "It does now." The exchange was brief, stripped of theatrics. Ayaan made it clear that Zara and her mother would not be returning, that legal consequences were already in motion should the harassment continue. Saad listened with tightening disbelief, then left with a warning wrapped in wounded pride. The door closed behind him with a finality that echoed through the apartment. Zara exhaled slowly, as if releasing a breath she had been holding for years. Relief washed over her, followed quickly by dread. She knew defiance came at a price. That price made itself known before evening. Ayaan received the call he had been anticipating and avoiding in equal measure. Nimra's voice was calm, but sharpened by rumor and implication. She did not accuse him directly. She did not need to. His silence during her questions revealed more than confession ever could. "I think you've already chosen," she said finally. Ayaan closed his eyes. "I should have spoken sooner," he replied. "I won't dishonor you with half-truths." The call ended without resolution, but the ending was clear. When Ayaan returned to the living room, Zara looked up from her mother's side and knew. Loss had a way of making itself visible. "I never wanted this to cost you," she said quietly. Ayaan shook his head. "What would have cost me more was pretending I didn't see what was right." The words hovered between them, heavy with implication. For days, they had circled the truth without naming it. Now it pressed forward undeniable. What had grown between them was no longer merely shared resolve. It was affection forged through courage, strengthened by witness, and tempered by restraint. That night, as Roxana slept peacefully, Ayaan and Zara sat facing one another in the stillness. There was no urgency in the moment, only clarity. "I won't live in secrecy," Ayaan said. "Not for protection, not for comfort. If I stand beside you, it will be openly." Zara's eyes filled, not with tears, but with something steadier. "I won't be the reason you fracture your life," she said. "I know what shame does to people." Ayaan leaned forward slightly, his voice unwavering. "Then let me rebuild mine honestly." He paused, the weight of his next words deliberate. "I'll marry you. Immediately." The declaration was not dramatic. It was resolute. It startled Zara precisely because of its calm. Marriage, for her, had been synonymous with captivity. To hear it offered as shelter, as choice, unsettled her more than refusal would have. "You don't rescue someone by replacing one cage with another," she said softly. "I know," Ayaan replied. "That's why this isn't rescue. It's commitment, with consent." Silence followed, thick but not strained. Zara looked toward her sleeping mother, then back at the man who had refused to look away. For the first time, the future did not feel like a narrowing corridor. "I won't decide tonight," she said. Ayaan nodded. "I'm not asking you to." The understanding between them was complete without conclusion. They had crossed no physical line, yet their lives were already irrevocably altered. Each had lost something: status, certainty, safety. Each had gained something far rarer: the knowledge that they were capable of choosing courage over convenience. As the night deepened, Zara sat beside her mother, watching her breathe, while Ayaan stood alone at the window, city lights reflecting back a version of himself he barely recognized. Neither knew what the coming days would demand. They only knew that retreat was no longer an option. And somewhere in that shared knowing, a different kind of beginning quietly took shape.